Brr. She married a poor soldier to avoid society, unaware he was the wealthiest alpha king in Scotland. Mist hung low over the highlands that evening, rolling like pale smoke over the jagged cliffs and silent forests. The village below glimmered faintly, candlelight flickering through tiny windows, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Lady Alara of Dunrath sat by her chamber window, the cold stone walls pressing in around her, and stared at the distant hills. She could hear the faint sound of the festival bells from the village below, carried by the chill wind, and for a fleeting moment she imagined herself there, anonymous among the crowd, invisible to her relentless family and the rigid eyes of society. Alara's life had been measured in expectations, the proper words to say, the proper dresses to wear, and the proper men to marry. She had tried to follow every rule, to smile politely, to bend like a willow under the weight of duty. But her spirit was no willow, buried. It was fire, and fire she knew could not be contained. She was to marry Lord Renly of Hearthaven in 3 weeks, a man she had met only in fleeting glances at court. Polite, cold, ambitious, an excellent match for her family, but for her heart it was a prison.
Her stomach twisted every time she thought of him, the thought of a life chained to a man she did not love, unbearable. That was why she had decided.
She would escape. She would marry someone beneath her station, someone unremarkable enough that the world would forget her and she could finally breathe. The plan had been simple in her mind, a secret she carried with fierce determination. But as the autumn wind rattled her window, she knew it was dangerous.
And dangerous, she realized, was exactly what she craved. By nightfall, she wrapped herself in a heavy cloak and slipped down the narrow stone stairs of her family's estate.
The guards were few and sleepy, and she had memorized their routines. Her heart raced, not from fear of being caught, but from the intoxicating thrill of freedom. The village was alive with the festival, lanterns swaying in the breeze, music drifting through the air, and the scent of roasted meat and sweet cakes everywhere. Alara moved through the crowd like a shadow, unnoticed by all but a few curious children who glanced at her wide-eyed. Her eyes searched for him, the soldier she had chosen. Cale was waiting near the edge of the village, leaning against a wooden post, his figure lit only by the lantern's soft glow. Her breath. He was not noble, not in any sense, but there was something in his stance, quiet and watchful, that drew her in. His hair was dark as midnight, and his eyes were a stormy gray, thoughtful and unreadable. His hands rested lightly on the hilt of a sword, not in threat, but as if the weapon were a natural extension of himself.
"Lady Alara," he said, his voice low but steady, as if he had been expecting her.
She felt a flutter in her chest, a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Cale," she replied, her own voice barely above a whisper.
Are you certain you will follow through? He interrupted gently. Yes?
"I have nothing to gain and everything to lose, but I do not fear the unknown if it is worth it."
His gaze held hers, unwavering, and she felt a strange calm settle over her heart. They walked to the chapel at the edge of the village, a small stone building hidden among twisted oaks and ivy. No, one would notice them there. The ceremony was brief. Just enough words, just enough binding, just enough truth to make them husband and wife. Neither spoke of love, for love was fragile and untested, but there was an unspoken promise. Here, in this shadowed chapel, they were free.
Afterward, they mounted horses Cale had borrowed from a friend, and they rode into the fog-laden highlands.
The wind whipped their cloaks around them, the horse hooves thundering against the damp earth, carrying Alara further away from the world she had known. She glanced at Cale, whose expression remained calm, almost unreadable, and yet there was a softness there, revealed only in brief moments when he looked at her as if she were a rare gem discovered by chance. Hours passed and the moon rose high over the hills. Burst. When they finally arrived at Kale's home, Elara expected a simple cottage, modest and hidden, a home befitting a soldier. But instead, she found herself before a massive stone fortress, perched on the cliffside as if carved from the mountain itself. Burnt towers rose high into the mist, windows gleaming like cold eyes in the dark, and banners with a strange, intricate sigil fluttered in the wind.
Elara gasped, gripping the horse's reins.
This is yours?" she whispered, disbelief threading her voice. Kale smiled faintly, a glimmer of amusement in his stormy eyes.
"It has been in my family for generations," he said simply. "I suppose I never mentioned it." "You never mentioned it?" Her voice rose, disbelief and irritation mingling.
"Ah! Kale, this is not a soldier's home. This is a castle. Brr. A king's home." He laughed softly, a sound that was both deep and warm. Inspiration. Perhaps it is time you learned that not everything is as it seems. Elara's mind whirled. She had married a man she thought was poor, a soldier of simple means to escape the suffocating expectations of her life. And now she discovered that she had bound herself to a man of unimaginable wealth and power, a man who could command armies, rule lands, and decide the fate of countless lives. Panic and excitement collided within her. Inside, the castle was even more astonishing. Tapestries lined the walls depicting battles, ancient kings, and mysterious symbols. Chandeliers of wrought iron and crystal hung from the high ceilings, reflecting the flickering firelight. Servants moved silently, bowing their heads in respect as Kale passed, and a strange, quiet authority clung to the air itself. Elara realized she had stepped into a world she had never known, and the man she had thought she understood was more enigmatic than she could have imagined. Kale offered her a seat by the fire and she obeyed, unable to speak, still trying to digest the revelation. You do not have to fear me," Kale said quietly, studying her. "I am not your enemy, Lady Elara. I am merely a man bound by duty and shadows you have yet to see." Elara wanted to be angry, wanted to demand answers, but the firelight and his calm, commanding presence unnerved her. For the first time in her life, she felt small and unworthy. Not in the presence of a nobleman, but in the presence of a man whose power seemed to stretch beyond her imagination, and yet whose eyes, for all their authority, held something she could not name. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire. The castle seemed alive, breathing around them, whispering secrets in the flickering shadows. Elara wandered through the corridors, her fingertips brushing the stone walls, each step echoing like a heartbeat. She glimpsed hallways lined with paintings of regal men and women, some familiar, some not, and she realized that this fortress was not just a home, it was a legacy, a kingdom unto itself. Finally, she stopped at a window overlooking the highlands. The fog had thickened, rolling over the cliffs like a living tide. Somewhere in that mist lay freedom, danger, and the unknown future that she had sought so desperately. And beside her, Kale stood silent, a sentinel in the dark, as if he had always belonged there and always would. Elara's heart ached with a strange, unexplainable longing for it. She had thought she was escaping one prison, only to find herself in another, a palace of stone and power with a man she could not yet understand. But there was also a thrill in it, a spark she could not ignore, as if fate itself had conspired to place her in this impossible, beautiful, terrifying moment. Then, from the mist outside, a shadow moved. It was not a wolf. nor any creature she could name. It was tall, unnatural, and it paused at the edge of the cliff, staring directly at the window where she stood, Barash. Her breath caught, and she turned to Kale. "Do you see it?" she whispered. Burr. Kale's eyes narrowed, his calm facade tightening just slightly. "I see it," he said, his voice low and steady, but there was an edge of concern she had not heard before. Desperation.
"And it is not here by chance." Elara's heart raced. She wanted to flee, to escape the castle, the power, and this strange, haunting presence outside.
But she was trapped, not by stone walls or golden halls, but by something far more binding. Curiosity, fear, and the strange pull she already felt toward Kael, the man she had married to escape the world, unaware that he ruled it. The wind howled through the cliffs, and the shadow moved again, vanishing into the fog. Yet the sense of being watched lingered, like a promise or a warning. Elara shivered, pulling her cloak around her shoulders, and looked at Kael.
"What is that?"
she asked. Desperation. Kale's storm-gray eyes met hers, and for the first time, he did not answer immediately. He took a deep breath, as if gathering words that carried weight beyond their sound. "Tomorrow," he said finally, "you will begin to understand that everything you thought you knew was only the surface, and not all who watch from the shadows are enemies." But some are. She had married to escape society, to hide from prying eyes, and yet here she was, in a castle full of whispers and shadows, married to a man she did not fully know, and already bound to mysteries far older and deeper than she could imagine. The night stretched on, and the castle settled into an uneasy quiet. Outside, the fog rolled endlessly over the highlands, and somewhere in its depths the shadow waited. Elara closed her eyes, holding on to the strange, fierce hope that perhaps, in this impossible place, she might finally find herself. But deep in her heart, a small, insistent fear whispered, freedom, once claimed, could still come at a terrible price. And Kale, watching her from the shadows of the room, knew the truth. Their journey had only just begun, and the games of power, heart, and fate had already started. The castle was alive, and it was watching. The morning fog lingered over the highlands like a blanket of silver, curling around the towers of Kale's fortress. Sunlight struggled to pierce the mist, and the wind carried a chill that hinted at the coming winter. Lady Elara awoke to the distant echo of a bell, the castle stirring slowly to life. Her head ached slightly from the whirlwind of the previous night, from the revelation that the man she had married to escape society was no ordinary soldier, but the wealthiest, most powerful king in Scotland. She wrapped a cloak around her shoulders and stepped onto the balcony overlooking the vast estate. The view stole her breath. Rolling hills, dark forests, and the river that glittered like a silver ribbon in the morning light. This was a land of kings, legends, and shadowed secrets. And somehow, she was now part of it. Kale appeared silently at the doorway, his dark hair slightly ruffled by the wind, eyes gray and stormy. He did not speak immediately, as if reading the storm of thoughts passing through her mind. "You are quiet this morning," he said finally, his voice smooth, commanding, yet gentle.
"I have much to consider," she replied, her voice steady though her heart raced.
This castle, your life, everything is more than I imagined."
How can I even begin to fit into this world? Kale studied her, his gaze piercing but not unkind. Fitting in is not required.
"Understanding is, and you will in time."
Elara shivered, not from the cold, but from the intensity of his presence. She realized that this man who seemed so calm and unyielding carried a weight in every movement, in every glance. His authority was natural, effortless, and yet she sensed a hidden sorrow behind those stormy eyes, as if he had learned to guard a heart that had already been broken many times. The castle itself seemed alive with history. Servants moved silently through the halls, bowing respectfully as Kale passed. Tapestries depicting ancient battles, crowned kings, and mysterious sigils lined the walls. Every step Elara took echoed, as though the stone remembered centuries of footsteps long past. She felt like an intruder in a kingdom older than memory itself, yet she could not deny a thrill of wonder at its majesty. Their breakfast was quiet, shared in a sunlit hall filled with the scent of fresh bread and herbs. Kale spoke little, watching her carefully, as if measuring her reaction to every detail of his world. Elara found herself drawn to his calm, magnetic presence, even as fear and confusion churned in her chest. She wanted to ask 100 questions about his power, his past, and the shadowy forest she had glimpsed last night, but the words caught in her throat. After the meal, Kale led her through the castle. Rooms opened one after another, a library filled with ancient tomes, a hall of ancestral portraits, a training yard where soldiers moved with precision, even in the chill of the morning.
Elara felt both awe and intimidation.
This was a man whose life had been forged in power, duty, and vigilance.
And yet, in the small moments, the glance of concern when she stumbled over the stone floor, the hand extended to steady her, she saw glimpses of something tender, a man capable of care, despite the burdens he carried. As the day wore on, Elara began to notice the strange occurrences Kale had not mentioned. Shadows shifted oddly in corners of the castle. Whispers seemed to linger in empty halls, and the wind itself carried voices she could not understand. "Do you hear that?" she asked, stopping in the library where dust motes danced in the sunlight. Kale's expression darkened slightly, and he nodded. "The castle carries its own echoes," he said. "But there are other things as well, remnants of a curse that has followed my bloodline for centuries." Elara's breath caught. "A curse?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What kind of curse?" Kyle hesitated, then gestured for her to follow him into a smaller chamber. Here, the air felt heavier, charged with an unseen energy. Scrolls and old books were stacked carefully on a table, their pages worn and brittle with age. "The rulers of my family," Kale explained, "have been bound by an ancient enchantment. Every generation carries it."
If the one we love most is not protected by trust and courage, they are lost to tragedy. And the one who loves them suffers as well.
"It is a shadow that has taken many before us." Elara's heart pounded. She had married him to escape the constraints of society, to claim freedom for herself, yet here she was, standing at the edge of a legacy darkened by centuries of pain. Fear pressed against her chest, but so did a strange fascination. She had always longed for life that carried risk, that challenged her, that demanded more than obedience. Now, that life had found her. Kale's gaze softened as he watched her reaction. "Do not fear it alone," he said. "If we trust one another, if we face the darkness together, perhaps we can break it." Elara wanted to believe him, but trust was not easily won. She had fled her family to escape control, and now she stood at the center of a fortress, married to a man who commanded not just her life but the lives of thousands. And yet, there was a pull between them, invisible but undeniable, a tension that made her breath catch whenever he looked at her. In the following days, she tried to learn the rhythms of life in the castle. She accompanied Kale on walks through the mist-laden forests where the trees bent and twisted like ancient sentinels. They passed the cliffs overlooking the highlands, their windswept peaks and shadowed valleys creating an almost otherworldly beauty. Here, away from the castle's walls, Kale seemed less a king and more a man carrying burdens too heavy for one soul.
He spoke of loyalty, of battles fought and survived, of choices that had left scars on his heart.
Elara listened, her own heart softening as she saw beyond his authority. She realized that power, though magnificent, had its cost. Kale had learned to guard his heart, and yet, in moments alone with her, he allowed glimpses of his vulnerability. Each revelation drew her closer, though she would not admit it even to herself. One evening, as the sky bled gold and crimson in the sunset, Elara followed Keol to the castle's edge, where the fog rolled endlessly over the cliffs. A cold wind whipped her hair around her face, and she shivered, pulling her cloak tight.
"Why did you not tell me?" she asked, her voice low, almost trembling. "Why hide your wealth, your title, everything?" Kale looked at her, and for the first time a shadow passed over his features.
Because some truths are too heavy to bear until the time is right, he said quietly.
And because I needed to know you.
For who you are, not for what you would see in a king.
Elara's chest tightened. She had thought she was choosing freedom, but she was learning that freedom could not exist in a vacuum.
She was bound to Kale, not by chains or duty, but by the strange gravity of understanding, trust, and unspoken emotion. As they spoke, a sudden movement caught her eye. Among the fog, a figure appeared, a man, tall and silent, watching them from the forest edge. She gasped, stepping back.
Who is that? She whispered. Kale's face darkened and his hand brushed hers briefly, a silent warning.
"Ah, old enemy," he said. "One who has waited for an opportunity to strike."
He knows of the curse, and he seeks to exploit it.
Fear coiled in Elara's stomach, sharp and sudden.
She had married to escape society, to hide from expectations and danger, and now danger had found her anyway, closer, sharper, more real than she could have imagined. The following days brought tension that hung in the air like the mist over the highlands. Servants whispered in corridors. Doors that were usually locked creaked open, and Elara sensed eyes upon her wherever she went. Kale became more distant, not from coldness, but from the necessity of vigilance. And yet, every stolen moment, every quiet conversation, every small gesture of care deepened the fragile connection forming between them.
One night Elara found herself wandering the halls alone, drawn by the soft glow of torchlight.
The castle seemed to pulse around her, shadows moving like living things. In the great hall, she found a tapestry depicting a king striking a deal with a shadowed figure. She traced her fingers over the threads, feeling the story beneath her touch. A sudden voice startled her. Curiosity is a dangerous companion, Lady Elara. Kale stepped from the shadows, his expression unreadable. She looked up at him, heart pounding, and saw not just the king, but the man who had chosen to marry her in secrecy, the man whose trust she must earn. I must understand this world, she said quietly. I cannot simply follow blindly. Kale nodded, his gaze softening. No, you must not, and I will not ask you to.
But understand this. There are powers here beyond wealth and armies. Shadows and curses that test the heart.
And soon you will see why we must be careful whom we trust. Elara swallowed, a knot of dread and fascination coiling in her chest. The castle, the highlands, Kale's very life, it was all more than she had imagined. And yet she could not turn away. Something within her longed to face the danger, to walk through the shadows with him, to test herself against the unknown. That night, As the wind howled through the cliffs and the fog rolled like waves over the highlands, Ilara lay awake in her chamber. Desperation. Her thoughts were a storm. Wonder, fear, attraction, and the thrilling ache of uncertainty. Kale's words echoed in her mind. Trust and courage will break the curse. Not just him, but herself. Her instincts, her courage. But deep in the castle, where shadows pooled in corners and old spirits lingered, a figure watched from the darkness. Eyes gleamed with knowledge, patience, and malice. Desperation. The curse was not yet broken, and the danger surrounding them had only begun. Ilara did not know it yet, but her journey had taken her far beyond mere escape. She had entered a world of power, secrets, and destiny, and the choices she made in the coming days would shape not only her life, but the life of the king she had married, and perhaps the fate of the entire realm. The highlands were silent that night, save for the whisper of the wind through the skeletal trees and the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. Inside the castle, Lady Ilara sat by the fire, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. She tried to calm her thoughts, but the memory of the shadowy figure from the forest gnawed at her mind. Kale had been silent for hours, staring into the fire with a distant look in his eyes, as if he were reliving some memory too heavy to speak aloud. "You are troubled," Kale said finally, his voice low, almost a growl against the quiet. "Brer."
Ilara looked up. "I cannot stop thinking about that man," she admitted.
"Desperation. Why is he here? What does he want?"
Kale's jaw tightened.
He seeks power and vengeance. He knows of the curse. Desperation. And he will do anything to exploit it. Ilara felt a shiver run down her spine. She had married Kale to escape one set of dangers, only to step straight into another. Her heart ached with the knowledge that the castle, magnificent and strong as it was, could not protect them from forces that moved in the shadows. The next morning, Kale called for a meeting in the great hall. Servants and advisors filed in silently, bowing as he took his place at the head of the long table. Ilara followed, her heart pounding in anticipation. She was beginning to understand the weight of his position. Not just the wealth, but the responsibility, the constant vigilance against enemies, both human and supernatural. Base. Kyle addressed the gathering with authority, outlining the threat that had arrived at their borders. An exiled nobleman, once part of the Scottish court, had returned with dark allies, men who dealt in curses and secrets, men who would stop at nothing to claim the throne. Ilara listened carefully, realizing that the world she had entered was far more dangerous than she had imagined. After the meeting, Kale led Ilara to the castle's armory, where rows of weapons gleamed under torchlight. Swords, axes, and shields lined in perfect order. Soldiers trained in the yard beyond, their movements precise, disciplined, unyielding. "You must understand," Kale said, turning to her, "that power here is measured in action, not title. The enemy will test us." Pure. Ilara nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. She had fled society to escape a life of control, but now she realized that courage was not about fleeing. It was about standing, even when the darkness pressed close.
That night, the castle was restless. Doors creaked, torches flickered, and shadows seemed to dance along the stone walls.
Desperation. Ilara could not sleep. She wrapped herself in a cloak and wandered the halls, drawn to the silence, the quiet hum of ancient power. Rotation. In the courtyard, she found Kyle practicing with his sword. Each strike was precise, deadly, yet graceful. His movements were a dance honed through years of battle and discipline. Ilara watched, captivated by the strength and focus he displayed, and for the first time she saw not a king nor a soldier, but a man who had survived storms no one else could imagine. Free. You are watching, Kale said without turning. I am learning, she said softly. Learning what it means to be strong, to protect, to fight. Kale paused, his blade still in midair, and for a moment their eyes met. There was a tension between them, unspoken yet palpable, a thread of connection that had grown stronger since the day they married. Strength is nothing without heart, he said quietly. And you, Elara, have a heart that could change everything. Before she could respond, a distant shout echoed across the courtyard. Soldiers ran past, their faces grim, and Kale's expression darkened instantly. An attack, he said, voice sharp, commanding. Stay inside. Now. Alara's heart raced as Kale drew his sword and moved toward the gate, his presence radiating authority and power. She wanted to follow, to stand beside him, but he shook his head. Not yet. Trust me to handle this. From her window, she watched the battle unfold. Shadows moved like living creatures at the edge of the forest. Dark figures, clad in black and moving with deadly precision, advanced toward the castle. Kale's soldiers met them with skill and courage, but the enemy was cunning, striking with arrows and traps she could barely see. Hilara's fear turned to determination. She ran to the castle's armory, taking a small dagger, and returned to the balcony to watch. She realized that she could not remain idle, that courage demanded action. Her heart pounded as she whispered a vow. She would not hide behind walls or fear. She would fight, even if it was only in her own way. The battle raged through the night. Kale fought with a precision that left even his soldiers in awe. Elara watched him from above, her chest tight with fear and something else, an unspoken admiration, a bond growing stronger with each swing of his sword. Then, as dawn broke over the highlands, the enemy withdrew, disappearing into the mist. The castle had survived, but the cost was clear. The shadow of the curse hung heavier, the threat still lingering like a storm on the horizon. Kale returned to the castle, his armor scorched, his sword nicked, and his face marked by exhaustion and determination.
He entered the great hall and looked at Elara.
You were watching, he said, his voice softer now, tinged with relief and something she could not name. Yes, she admitted, bare. And I realized I cannot be afraid. Not if we are to survive. Kale studied her, his storm-gray eyes reflecting the firelight.
Courage is rare, he said.
And yours is needed more than you know. In the days that followed, Kale and Elara grew closer.
She began to understand his world, the strategies, the dangers, the weight of responsibility, and he in turn saw her bravery, her intelligence, her ability to remain calm even in the face of fear. Their bond deepened, built on trust, respect, and the quiet recognition of each other's strength. One evening, Kale led Elara to the castle's highest tower. From there, the highlands stretched endlessly, rolling hills and dark forests fading into the horizon. The wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of earth and mist, and Elara felt a strange exhilaration. There is something you must see, Kale said, taking her hand and guiding her to the edge. Below, in a hidden grove, the shadowy figure they had seen before moved among the trees. Its presence was unnatural, and the air around it shimmered with an otherworldly energy.
Elara shivered. That is the one who brings the curse closer, Kael explained.
He has waited for centuries for a chance to strike at my bloodline, and now, with you here, he senses a weakness.
Elara's heart raced.
She realized that the life she had fled was nothing compared to this world of shadows, curses, and power.
And yet she also understood that fear alone could not guide her.
Desperation. Courage, trust, and unity were the only weapons they had.
Kale turned to her, his expression serious, his hand still holding hers.
Brr,
You must know, Elara, this will not be easy.
brr. The enemy will test us, push us to our limits. And the curse, it will try to divide us, to turn our hearts against one another. But if we survive, if we remain true, we may yet break it. Elara felt a chill, but also a fierce determination. Then we will face it together, she said. No matter what comes, we will face it side by side. KL's eyes softened, and for a brief moment the storm of power and authority gave way to something human, tender, and vulnerable. Together, he agreed. That night the castle was alive with whispers. Aberrations. Shadows moved in corners, and strange lights flickered along the walls. Brr.
Elara could feel the weight of destiny pressing down, but she also felt the first true sense of belonging, the connection to KL, and the realization that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to stand in spite of it.
There. But the shadow was patient, and the curse was cunning. Even as they stood together, united, a new threat moved closer, unseen and silent, waiting for the moment to strike. The first real test was coming, and neither of them knew if they were ready. The highlands lay under a silver cloak of mist, the morning light weakly brushing the jagged cliffs with pale gold. Lady Elara stood at the edge of the castle balcony, her cloak fluttering in the cold wind. Her heart thudded with anticipation and fear. The shadowy figure had returned the night before, moving like smoke through the forest, and Kale had called the castle to readiness. Every soldier, every servant, every ally was on edge. Brr. Elara had trained these past weeks, not in swordplay, not yet in the art of battle, but in courage, strategy, and understanding the shadows that moved unseen. She had learned that power was not just in armies or riches, but in awareness, trust, and the strength of one's own heart. Barash. Kale had taught her much, and yet she knew that tonight would demand more than instruction. It would demand risk, courage, and absolute unity. Kale appeared beside her, his storm-gray eyes sweeping over the highlands. He looked unshaken as always, but Elara sensed the tension in the set of his jaw and the tightness in his shoulders. Tonight, he said quietly, we face what the curse has waited for. We face the enemy who has lingered in the shadows for centuries, and the choice that will decide not only our lives but the fate of the bloodline.
Elara swallowed, her throat tight, and nodded. Then we face it together, she said.
Her voice was steady, filled with the courage she had cultivated in these weeks of trial. Kale's hand brushed hers, the familiar warmth grounding her amidst the storm of fear and anticipation. The enemy approached silently through the forest, shadows melting into mist. Elara could feel the tension in the air, the pulse of danger. And then, as if the castle itself recognized the threat, the ancient stones seemed to hum with energy, corridors echoing with whispers of old power. Kale moved first, leading the soldiers to the gates. His sword flashed like lightning, precise and unyielding. Elara stayed behind for a moment, watching him, seeing not the king or the warrior, but the man who had chosen to trust her, to draw her into a world she had barely imagined, and who now relied on her courage as much as she relied on his strength. Suddenly a shadow swept over the courtyard. The enemy had revealed itself, a tall, silent figure with eyes that glimmered like cold fire. Its presence radiated danger and an unnatural energy that twisted the air. Soldiers hesitated for a brief heartbeat, and Kale's hand gripped the hilt of his sword tighter. Bear. Elara, he said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. You must stay close. Do not let fear guide you. Bray. Trust in yourself, in me, and in what we have learned. Elara nodded, her heart steadying. Inspiration. She stepped forward, clutching the dagger she had taken from the armory. It was small, yet in her hand it felt like a talisman, a symbol of the courage she now carried. The shadowed enemy advanced and the battle began. Swords clashed, sparks flying into the foggy night. Inspiration. Elara watched, her breath quickening as Kale moved like a storm unleashed, his every strike precise, his every command measured. She realized that the man she had married to escape society was not just powerful but a force of destiny, honed by years of danger and responsibility. And then the enemy turned toward her. Alara's breath caught, and fear threatened to paralyze her. But she remembered Kale's words. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to stand in spite of it. She raised her dagger and stepped forward. Inspiration. The shadow moved with unnatural speed, but her resolve was sharper than any blade. You are strong. A voice hissed, cold and unnatural, echoing in her mind.
But strength alone cannot save you! Elara steadied herself. No, she whispered.
Inspiration. But courage, trust, and love can. She lunged, her dagger meeting the enemy's weapon with a clash that rang through the courtyard. Sparks flew, and the shadow recoiled, surprised by her sudden determination. Kale moved to her side, his presence a protective force, and together they pushed back the darkness. For what felt like hours, they fought. Elara moved with the rhythm of battle, her fear replaced by focus, her courage fueled by the bond between her and Kale. Every step they took, every strike they made, seemed to unravel the curse that had haunted his family for centuries. Finally, Kale and Elara cornered the enemy in the castle's highest tower, where the wind tore through open windows and the fog clung to the stone like a living thing. The shadow hissed, twisting with fury, and for a moment it seemed unstoppable. Inspiration. Kale faced the figure, his sword raised, but he hesitated. In that hesitation, Elara saw the opportunity, the moment where courage could triumph over darkness. She stepped forward, placing her hand on Kale's arm. Together, she whispered. Inspiration. Kale's eyes softened. He nodded, and together they turned toward the shadow, not as king and wife, but as equals, united in purpose, trust, and heart. Inspiration. Elara remembered the stories Kale had shared, the betrayals, the losses, the sacrifices. And she realized that the curse fed on fear, distrust, and pain. They had to face it not with hatred or vengeance, but with openness, understanding, and courage. Drawing a deep breath, Elara spoke, her voice steady and clear. We will face this together, with trust and courage. You have no power over us. Inspiration. The shadow recoiled as if struck by invisible force. Its form shimmered and twisted, and for the first time, Elara saw something unexpected. Fear. The ancient enemy, which had haunted Kale's bloodline for generations, trembled before the power of their unity. Kale moved beside her, his hand brushing hers in a silent promise. Inspiration. You are remarkable, he said, almost in awe.
You carry the courage to challenge fate itself. With one final combined effort, Kale struck the shadow, and Elara followed with her dagger, a symbol of her courage.
Brr. Light erupted from their unity, bright and pure, burning away the darkness, the curse, and the weight of centuries. The shadow screamed once, a sound that echoed through the castle and then vanished, leaving only silence. The castle, too, seemed to breathe a sigh. The oppressive weight of the curse lifted, replaced by a serene calm. Bear. Elara and Kale stood together, breathing heavily, hands clasped, eyes meeting with the unspoken understanding that they had survived not only a battle of swords, but a battle of hearts. Elara felt tears sting her eyes. Brr. It's over, she whispered, scarcely believing it. Kale shook his head gently. It is only the beginning, he said softly. For us, for this land, but we have faced it. Brr. Together. The wind carried their words over the highlands, scattering the last remnants of mist and shadow. The sun broke through in golden rays, illuminating the castle and the rolling hills beyond. Elara felt a surge of hope and freedom unlike anything she had known. She had married to escape, but she had found something far greater. Purpose, courage, and a love forged in the crucible of darkness.
In the days that followed, life in the castle began to settle into a new rhythm.
Soldiers trained, the halls echoed with laughter and music, and the whispers of shadows faded into memory. Kale and Elara walked the highlands together, their bond strengthened by shared trials and unspoken understanding. Elara learned the ways of the castle, not as a timid lady seeking escape, but as a queen by Kale's side, equal in courage, wisdom, and heart. She saw the vulnerability beneath his authority, the moments where the weight of power pressed upon him, and she was there, steady, strong, unwavering. Baal, in turn, saw Elara not just as the wife who had escaped society, but as a partner, a force that had challenged him, inspired him, and stood beside him when the shadows loomed. Her courage had changed him, softened the edges of a man hardened by centuries of vigilance and responsibility. One evening they stood on the cliffs overlooking the highlands, the wind tousling their hair and the sun painting the world in warm gold. Kale took Elara's hand, holding it with a tenderness that spoke louder than words. You are no longer the woman who fled, he said softly. You are something far greater, a partner, a queen, a heart brave enough to face the unknown. And I am no longer the man burdened only by shadows. Because of you, I can be free. Elara smiled, her eyes glistening. And I am no longer afraid, she replied. Not of society, not of danger, not of what the future may hold, because I will face it with you. They stood together, looking out over the misted highlands, the wind carrying the whispers of the past, but no longer the weight of fear. The castle behind them was no longer just a fortress of stone. It was a home, a sanctuary, a place where courage, love, and trust had triumphed over darkness. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with fire and gold, Elara knew that this was only the beginning, not of danger, but of a legend they would write together, forged in shadow, trust, and the unbreakable strength of love. The curse was broken, the shadows defeated, and the love they had discovered in the depths of darkness shone brighter than any crown or kingdom. For in the heart of the highlands a queen and her king stood together, united, fearless, and ready for whatever future awaited them.